That morning, I stepped out onto my porch and saw 3 concrete trucks parked on my land as if they had always belonged there. No one asked. No one asked for permission. The heavy diesel engines shook the air. Massive tires crushed the gravel I had spread with my own hands over 20 years. The smell of fresh cement and mixer exhaust blended into the morning breeze, overpowering the scent of damp grass and the black coffee in my hand. A man in a polo shirt with the HOA logo stood in the middle of my field, a clipboard tucked under his arm. He pointed toward the tree line along the boundary and told the workers, "Just park here. It's more convenient." Convenient. I stood still and took a sip of coffee. The bitterness slid slowly down my throat, hot like the anger I was holding back. That piece of land is nearly 3 acres, sitting right next to the HOA's newly built subdivision. I bought it 22 years ago, when this place was nothing but open pasture and no one cared about it. I do not live in the HOA. I never signed any covenant. I do not pay a single dollar in management fees. I chose this place for freedom, and yet that morning, my freedom had been turned into a temporary parking lot for their project. A 4th concrete mixer rolled in, then another truck loaded with steel followed behind it. The tires left deep ruts in the soil, still damp with night dew. I heard laughter from their side, relaxed, confident, as if this was simply a natural extension of their neighborhood. I walked down into the field. The morning wind brushed against the wooden fence, carrying the sharp clank of metal striking metal. The man in the polo turned when he saw me. "Are you the landowner?" he asked, wearing a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am the legal owner," I replied. He nodded, his tone light as if negotiating the price of coffee. "We're just parking here for a few days. We ran out of space over there. We're all neighbors here." "Neighbors?" I looked him straight in the eye. "This is private property. I do not authorize commercial use." He shrugged. "It's just for convenience. You're not even using this part." That sentence hung in the air like an invisible slap. "You're not even using this part." They looked at the empty land and saw waste. I looked at it and saw my sweat, the blueprints I once sketched under yellow desk lamps, the 30 years I worked as a construction engineer to earn enough to buy it and keep it. I turned and walked back to the house without another word. Behind me, the engines kept roaring. They thought I was backing down. They were wrong. In the kitchen, I set my coffee down, opened a drawer, and pulled out my camera with a telephoto lens. I photographed every license plate, every company logo, every worker's face. The wall clock read 8:15 in the morning. I have overseen projects worth tens of millions of dollars. I understand liability. I understand commercial liability. If one of those concrete trucks leaked oil onto my land, who would be responsible? If a worker slipped and fell, who would get sued? I knew the answer. Not the HOA. Not the President Karen with her perfectly trimmed hair and that practiced smile. Me. Around noon, she showed up. A glossy white SUV pulled up near the boundary line. Karen stepped out, her high heels sinking slightly into the dirt. "I hear you're not happy," she said, her voice soft as velvet but her eyes sharp as a blade. "This is private property," I repeated. She smiled. "We're building 20 new homes. Property values in this area will go up. You benefit too." I looked at the vehicles weighing tens of thousands of pounds pressing into my land. "I don't sell benefits. I protect ownership." Her smile tightened for just a fraction of a second, then returned to normal. "Don't make this complicated. It's just a few days." I nodded as if considering it, then said slowly, "Then everything should be clear." She did not understand what I meant. She walked away believing she had just handled a difficult old man. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up the state statutes on unauthorized commercial use and storage. I read every line carefully, the same way I used to study overpass blueprints when I was still working. In a small section, I stopped. If a landowner posts clear notice of commercial storage fees and vehicles continue to park after being informed, those fees may be enforced and can become the basis for a property lien. I leaned back in my chair. They thought I was just an old man living on the edge of the HOA. They did not know I had negotiated contracts worth tens of millions. They did not know I understood construction and commercial law better than their entire board. Outside, the engines were still running. Headlights washed over my field like an occupation. I looked out the window and heard Karen's voice in my head. "It's just for convenience." I smiled. Convenience always has a price. They received my legal letter on Monday morning. And they laughed. I know they laughed because one of the workers recorded the HOA meeting and accidentally sent the video into the community group chat. In the blurry clip, I could clearly hear Karen's voice, high and dripping with sarcasm. He actually sent a cease and desist, like something out of those Reddit stories. The whole room burst into laughter. I sat in front of my computer and replayed the video over and over. Not because I was angry, but because I was memorizing every face, every expression. That confidence, that sense of superiority, that is what makes people careless. My cease and desist was sent by certified mail. The wording was brief, clear, and emotionless. I demanded that they immediately stop the unauthorized commercial use of private property. I cited the statutes on trespass and liability. I gave them 3 days. 3 days passed. On the morning of the 4th day, I stepped out onto my porch. Not only had they failed to remove any vehicles, they had added 2 more. 7 heavy trucks were now sitting on my land, their tires pressed deep into the soft ground. A slick black stain of oil shimmered under the morning sun. The air was thick with the smell of hot metal and cement. They were not just ignoring me, they were challenging me. That afternoon, I drove into the HOA neighborhood. The automatic gate opened with a smooth mechanical hum. Newly painted beige houses lined the streets, identical tile roofs, lawns trimmed with precision. Perfect order, perfect appearances. I walked into the meeting room while the board was in session. Cold white lights cast down over the long table. Karen sat at the head, back straight, confident like a small queen ruling her artificial kingdom. She looked at me with a smile, thin as paper. "This is a private meeting." "So is mine," I said, placing a copy of the letter on the table. "My private matter." A few members exchanged uneasy glances. A gray-haired man cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Karen crossed her arms. "You're overreacting. It's just empty land." I met her gaze. Empty does not mean unowned. The air in the room grew heavy. I could hear the low hum of the air conditioner above us. I gave formal notice. "You continue to park commercial vehicles. That constitutes unauthorized commercial use." A woman at the far end of the table whispered, "Should we talk to a lawyer?" Karen turned sharply toward her, eyes cold. "There's no need. He's bluffing." Bluffing. I have sat in boardrooms 10 times larger than this one. I have negotiated contracts worth tens of millions of dollars with the most stubborn contractors. I know when someone is bluffing, and when they have no idea who they are dealing with. "I'm not bluffing," I said slowly. "I am documenting." I left the room before anyone could respond. Behind me, I heard Karen let out a soft laugh. Confident. Certain. That night, I sat alone in my office. On my desk lay the cadastral map, the deed to the property, and a thick volume of state statutes. I called an old friend, a lawyer who specializes in commercial real estate. After listening, he was silent for a few seconds. "You know what you're doing, right?" he asked. "I do. If they continue after clear notice and proper signage, you have the right to charge commercial storage fees." I looked out the window. Headlights from the trucks swept across my field as if they were planting a flag. "And if they refuse to pay, you can proceed with a lien." I closed my eyes for a moment. Lien. A small word, powerful enough to paralyze any construction project. The next morning, I installed 2 additional cameras with wide angles. I measured precisely the square footage being occupied. I logged the time each vehicle entered and exited. I was no longer reacting like a man who felt insulted. I was acting like an owner preparing a case file. On the other side of the fence, Karen stood talking to a contractor. I saw her point toward my shakes, shake her head, and laugh. In her mind, I was just a stubborn old man, living alone, no family, no influence. She did not know I had once been a project director on developments worth more than $20 million. She did not know I understood every line of the contracts they had signed with their contractors. She did not know I knew exactly what they feared most: money. When the sun went down, my land was still full of trucks. The sound of metal clanging, engines idling, voices laughing. They thought I had been dismissed. They thought that letter was nothing more than an old man's anger. I sat at my desk and opened a new document. I typed the title very slowly: Commercial Storage Notice. If they wanted to turn my land into a commercial parking lot, then I would turn it into a real commercial parking lot. At my price. The 8th tanker truck spilled oil right in the lowest part of my land. The black stain spread like an open wound across the grass, glistening under the midday sun. I stood a few meters away, listening to the workers curse as they tried to shove rags under the belly of the truck. The sharp, bitter smell of burning oil rushed straight into my nose. My soil began absorbing that liquid, drop by drop. Karen was not there, but I knew that if she had been, she would have repeated her familiar line: "It's just for convenience." I took photos, close-ups of the oil stain, wide shots of the tanker. The clock on my phone read 2:36 in the afternoon. I noted the weather conditions, the temperature, the wind direction. Professional habits never truly leave you. One of the workers looked at me, irritation flickering in his eyes. "We'll clean it up." "I certainly hope so," I replied calmly. But I knew the truth. Diesel soaking into soil does not disappear with a few rags. If there were an environmental inspection, if there were a complaint, if there were an accident, the liability would fall on the landowner. Me. That evening, I called a local environmental consulting firm. I did not say much. I asked hypothetically, if a commercial vehicle leaked oil on private land without authorization to use it, who would be responsible? The answer was short: the landowner first. I ended the call. A cold sensation ran down my spine. Not fear, but clarity. They were not just underestimating me. They were placing me in legal jeopardy without even blinking. The next morning, I stepped onto the porch. The field was busier than the day before. Metal clanged sharply. A forklift moved back and forth, its tracks crushing what little wild grass remained. I looked past the fence and saw Karen speaking with a group of residents. She pointed toward my land, shook her head, and laughed. I could not hear her words, but I could read her lips. "He's overreacting." A middle-aged man standing beside her frowned. I imagined he was calculating. How much is this project worth? If it gets delayed, who pays the price? I went back inside. I reopened the state statutes I had marked the night before. In a small section, nearly lost among the long provisions, there was language regarding unauthorized commercial storage. If a landowner posts clear signage stating specific fees and vehicles continue to park after notice, that action may be considered acceptance of the terms of use. Acceptance. I read that word several times. They did not ask permission. But if they continued after seeing clearly stated terms, they would be voluntarily stepping into the game. I opened my laptop and began designing a sign. Large letters, bold, impossible to misread. Private commercial storage. I paused and considered the number. Not too low to be dismissed, not so high as to appear unreasonable. $500 per vehicle per day. I leaned back in my chair. $500 was not random. It is the average rate for construction equipment storage in this area. I know, because I have signed those contracts before. Karen thinks I am just an old man living alone, no family, no influence. She does not know I once managed budgets exceeding $20 million for highway and bridge projects. She does not know I understand how delay costs can reach tens of thousands per day. She does not know I have negotiated with contractors far more stubborn than she will ever be. They see empty land. I see leverage. That afternoon, when the forklift rolled past the oil stain that had been wiped only superficially, I stepped onto the field once more. I measured precisely the area being occupied. I counted the vehicles. 8 commercial vehicles. I calculated quietly. If they stayed 10 days, the number would no longer be small. The evening wind moved across the field, carrying laughter from the neighborhood. Perhaps they believed this story would fade. that I would grow tired, that I would let it go. I stood in the middle of my land, looking at the deep ruts and the blotches of oil. No, I was no longer angry. I was preparing. That night, I ordered 2 large metal signs, white background with black lettering. I requested rush delivery within 2 days. I also drafted another legal notice, this time not merely a demand to cease, but terms. If they wanted to turn my land into a commercial staging ground, then from the moment that sign was erected, every rotation of a tire would carry a price. And I knew one thing for certain. When money starts being calculated by the day, laughter disappears very quickly. At 6 in the morning, I put up the first sign. By 8, it was gone. All that remained were 2 bare screw holes in the wooden post, as if someone had deliberately erased the warning. I stood there staring at the empty space, the early wind cutting cold across my face. Not angry, not surprised, just confirming what I had already expected. They would not take it seriously until they were forced to. The sign I installed the night before stood at chest height. White background, bold black letters, clear and impossible to misunderstand. Private commercial storage, $500 per vehicle per day. By parking here, you agree to these terms. I had ordered 2 signs. One at the dirt road entrance, one near the tree line bordering the HOA. I photographed every angle, every measured distance, and documented the installation time, 6:12 in the morning. And now, one of them had been removed. I went back inside and opened the security footage. I rewound the recording. At 7:28 in the morning, a white SUV pulled up near the boundary. The door opened. Karen stepped out. She looked around. No sign of me. No one else nearby. She walked straight to the sign. It took less than a minute. She used a screwdriver to remove the bolts, pulled the sign down, and tossed it into the trunk of her vehicle. I paused the video, zoomed in on her face. Calm, determined, certain she was doing the right thing. I let out a quiet laugh. She did not understand that in that moment, she shifted from confident authority to property trespasser. I did not rush outside. I did not call the police. I did not walk into the HOA. I installed the second sign. This time, I used a steel post driven deep into the ground, secured with concrete. I mounted an additional wide-angle camera directly above it, not hidden, clearly visible. As I tightened the final bolt, one of the workers approached me. "Are you really going to charge us?" he asked, half joking, half concerned. "I started yesterday," I replied. He stood silent for a few seconds, staring at the line that read $500 per vehicle per day. I could see the math forming in his eyes. With 8 trucks, each day was no small number. Minutes later, Karen appeared. This time she was not smiling. "You don't have the right to do this," she said, her voice tight. "I have the right over my land. You're trying to extort us." I looked directly at her. "I am providing commercial storage services. The terms are clearly posted." She pointed at the sign. "We do not agree." I provided notice. "You continue to park after seeing the sign. Under the law, that constitutes acceptance of the terms." Her face paled, just slightly, just for a second, but I saw it. A few residents standing nearby began whispering. A middle-aged man, likely a board member, stepped forward. "We should speak to an attorney," he said quietly to Karen. She snapped back. "There's no need. He's bluffing." Bluffing. I have heard that word hundreds of times in negotiations worth more than $20 million. People use it when they are not certain the ground beneath them is stable. Karen thinks I am just an old man living on the edge of the community. No voice, no influence. She does not know I once approved contracts for construction companies now working on their project. She does not know I understand insurance structures, delay penalty clauses, and how a lien can paralyze an entire supply chain. That afternoon, I printed the first ledger. 8 vehicles, 1-day build since the sign was installed. $500 per vehicle. The number appeared on the screen, clear and cold. I saved the file under a simple name. Ledger Day 1. Outside, engines were still running. They did not move the trucks. Perhaps they believed I would not go any further. I walked out onto the field at sunset. The fading light painted the concrete drums in shades of orange, creating a scene both beautiful and bitter. Karen stood on the other side of the fence, on her phone. Her voice was higher than usual, faster, more urgent. I could not hear the words, but I saw her hand gripping the phone tightly. Her confidence was beginning to crack. I did not need to shout. I did not need to threaten. I only needed to let time pass. Every rotation of a tire, every hour that slipped by, every day they chose to stay. The cost was rising, and this time, no one could take that sign down anymore. By the 12th day, the number on my spreadsheet had passed $30,000, and they still had not moved a single vehicle. I stared at the computer screen under the soft yellow light of my office. 8 vehicles, $500 per vehicle per day. 12 consecutive days after the sign had been legally installed. The figure stood there, cold and precise. $36,000. Not pocket change. Not a joke anymore. I reopened the archived footage. Day 1, Day 2, Day 3. Every morning, the trucks were still there. Every evening, headlights swept across my field, as if they were occupying it lawfully. They thought I would grow tired first. They did not understand that I had once managed projects that lasted 3 years, under the pressure of budgets worth tens of millions of dollars. Waiting does not weaken me, it sharpens me. That morning, I printed the first invoice. Commercial storage invoice. Recipient, HOA Board of Directors. Number of vehicles, 8. Storage duration, 12 days. Rate, $500 per vehicle per day. Total, $36,000. I signed it. No shaking. No hesitation. When I sent the invoice by certified mail for the second time in 2 weeks, the postal clerk looked at me with curiosity. I simply nodded. That afternoon, my phone rang. Karen. I let it ring twice before answering. Are you serious? Her voice was high, tight, no longer smooth. I am always serious. $36,000? You think we're going to pay that? I believe you are using commercial storage services. Silence. I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. You cannot just set a price like that. I posted the terms publicly. You continued parking after receiving notice. It's empty land. It's my land. I heard papers rustling. Perhaps she was holding the invoice, staring at that number as if it were a crack forming in a wall she thought was solid. You're trying to sabotage our project. I lowered my voice. No, you are doing that. I ended the call before she could continue. That evening, I saw the lights on in the HOA meeting room until nearly 10 at night. Shadows moved back and forth behind the thin curtains. I imagined the arguments unfolding inside, one person suggesting they should pay, another proposing they countersue, someone calculating the cost of delays if the vehicles were tied up any longer. Karen was probably still trying to sound certain. He's just bluffing. He won't follow through. But deep down, I knew doubt had begun to settle in. I had not only created a spreadsheet, I had prepared a file, daily photographs, video proof that the vehicles had not moved, copies of legal notices, certified mail receipts, photos showing the sign properly installed and secured. I called my attorney again. And if they don't pay? I asked. You can file a lien against the commercial vehicles if you have sufficient evidence of a legally incurred debt. I closed my eyes for a moment. A lien is not a threat. A lien is a tool, and I know exactly how much weight it carries. When I was still in the industry, the mere mention of a lien would trigger an emergency meeting in the finance department. No contractor wants their equipment legally encumbered. On the morning of the 13th day, I stepped onto the field. A thin layer of fog still clung to the tanker roofs. 8 trucks remained there, heavy and silent, like beasts unaware they were already inside a trap. Karen stood beyond the fence, speaking with a man in a suit, likely an attorney. I saw her gesture toward me, her face more strained than before. The man in the suit looked at the sign, read it slowly, then scanned the field, as if assessing the seriousness of the situation. I kept my expression calm. No provocation, no challenge, just a landowner enforcing his rights. They once believed I was just an old man living alone. No family, no influence. They did not know I understood exactly how the system works. They did not know I had spent 30 years on the other side of the conference table, signing decisions that could change an entire construction site in a single day. Now, I did not need to give orders. I only needed to let the number keep rising. Each day that passed, $500 per vehicle. Financial karma is not loud. It does not explode. It accumulates, and when it comes due, it does not ask whether anyone is ready. An emergency meeting was called on Friday night. And this time, they were not laughing. I walked into the HOA meeting room exactly at 7 o'clock. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. There was no casual chatter, no dismissive glances, only tension. Karen sat at the head of the table, but her back was no longer as straight as usual. Beside her sat a man in a gray suit, a leather briefcase placed neatly in front of him. An attorney. "I'm here at your invitation," I said, setting my thick file on the table. Karen looked at me, irritation mixed with unease in her eyes. "We believe your invoice is unreasonable." I opened the file. Inside were neatly printed pages, photographs, timestamps, license plates, copies of notices, certified mail receipts, images of the sign secured with a steel post and concrete. "I believe it is accurate." The attorney leaned forward slightly. "You are requesting $36,000 as of day 12. What is the amount now?" "As of this morning, $40,000. The room fell silent. A board member whispered, "This is getting out of control." Karen shot him a sharp look, but I noticed the faint tremor at the corner of her mouth. "You are trying to force us," Karen said, her voice tense. "I am enforcing my rights as a landowner," I replied. "You were notified. You saw the sign. You chose to continue." The attorney opened his folder. "Do you have evidence that the vehicles remained after the sign was installed?" I slid a USB drive toward him. Video for each day, each hour. He watched several clips in silence. His expression shifted subtly, from skepticism to calculation. "I have also documented the unauthorized removal of the sign on the morning of day 2, I added, looking directly at Karen. Her face paled. "I did not do that," she shot back. I turned the laptop screen toward the room. The footage played. The white SUV. Karen stepping out. A screwdriver in her hand. The sign removed and thrown into the trunk. No one spoke for several seconds. The soft hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. The attorney cleared his throat lightly. Removing the sign could constitute property interference. Another board member turned to Karen, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" Karen stood abruptly. "I was trying to resolve the issue before it escalated." "I think you did the opposite," the gray-haired man said, meeting her eyes for the first time. I remained seated, my hand resting on the file. I did not need to say more. They once believed I was just a solitary old man living outside the HOA boundary, with no one behind me. They did not know I had sat in rooms far larger than this, where a single bad decision could cost millions of dollars. They did not know I understood the weight of documentation and legal procedure. The attorney closed his folder. If the fee was properly posted and the vehicles continued parking after notice, he has legal grounds to demand payment. If payment is not made, he may proceed with a lien. The word landed on the table like a stone. Lien. I saw a young woman on the board swallow hard. Another member lowered his head, flipping through the copy of the invoice again and again. Karen looked at me, and for the first time there was no contempt in her eyes, only anger mixed with fear. "Would you really do that?" she asked. I answered slowly. "If you continue using my land without payment, I will have no other choice." The truth is, I did have a choice. I could ignore it. I could compromise. But I chose principle. Because if I yielded today, tomorrow they would park more trucks. And next year, they might treat my land as a default extension of the HOA. The attorney turned to the board. "I advise you to take this seriously. Each day that passes, the debt increases by $4,000. The air in the room felt drained of oxygen. Karen sat down slowly. Her shoulders were no longer rigid. The wall of confidence was visibly cracking. I stood. "I will give you 3 more days to respond formally." After that, I will file according to statute. I walked out of the meeting room, leaving behind hurried whispers. Outside, it was dark. Pale yellow streetlights cast their glow over the immaculate HOA pavement. I took a long breath. They once thought I was powerless, but real power does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who understands the rules of the game, and I know exactly what my next move will be. On the morning of the 15th day, I filed the lien with the county. By noon, Karen's phone was ringing nonstop. I stood in the county administrative office as the red stamp came down on the final page. The dry, sharp sound echoed like a gavel, closing a courtroom session. Completed. 8 commercial vehicles were now officially encumbered by a lien for unpaid storage fees. As of that morning, the total stood at $42,000, and with each passing day, another $4,000 would be added. I walked out of the government building with an unexpected sense of calm. No gloating, no anger, just the quiet of a man who had done what needed to be done. At 11:12 in the morning, my phone vibrated. "Karen," I answered. "Have you lost your mind?" Her voice had no control left. No velvet softness, only panic. "Did you really file the lien?" "Yes." "You cannot do that to the contractor's property." "I am not doing anything to their property. I am enforcing my rights over my land and a legally incurred debt." I heard someone speaking loudly in the background, a man's voice, sharp and angry, likely a contractor's representative. "We can't move the vehicles," Karen said, her voice lower now. "They're saying the system has recorded the lien." "That's correct." A long silence followed. I could picture her face, no longer the one directing meetings, but someone cornered. That afternoon, an unfamiliar pickup truck pulled up in front of my house. A middle-aged man stepped out. White dress shirt, tie loosened, beads of sweat on his forehead. "I represent the construction company," he said. I invited him onto the porch. Not into the living room, just the porch, clear boundaries. "We just learned about the lien," he said bluntly. "This is stalling the entire project. I sent multiple notices. We thought it was just a dispute with the HOA. I do not have a contract with the HOA. I own that land." He was quiet for a few seconds, then asked more softly, "You used to work in this industry?" I looked at him. His expression had changed. He was no longer seeing a stubborn old man. "I managed projects far larger than this one, many times," I replied. Recognition flickered in his eyes. He understood. I was not speaking casually. "We cannot deliver homes if our equipment is legally tied up," he said. "Every day of delay costs us thousands of dollars." "So does this," I answered. "Every day my land is used, I lose control over my property." He exhaled slowly. "We need a solution. Pay the outstanding balance. I will sign the lien release." He nodded gradually. "I will speak with the board." That evening, I saw the lights on again in the HOA meeting room, but this time there was no laughter, no confidence, only worry. A board member called me around 8 in the evening. His voice sounded tired. "We were not fully informed about the seriousness of this." I provided notice. "I know," he sighed. "We are considering payment." Karen did not call again that night, but the next morning, she appeared at my gate. No carefully done makeup, no high heels, just a woman facing consequences. "You've won," she said, her voice hoarse. I shook my head. This was never a competition. "Will you withdraw the lien?" "When the debt is paid." She looked down at the ground. "You don't understand the pressure we're under." I met her eyes. "I understand very well. I lived under pressure for 30 years in the construction industry. The difference is, I never used someone else's property without permission." The morning breeze moved across the field, brushing against the metal sign that still stood firm. Karen once believed I was powerless, an old man living alone, with no voice in the community. But real power does not come from the title of HOA president. It comes from ownership, from knowledge, from patience. By the end of the day, the total had reached $46,000. Financial karma is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is simply precise. And now, the entire HOA was feeling every single number. They offered to pay half, and they said it as if they were doing me a favor. The meeting took place on Tuesday afternoon, in the same room that had once been filled with mocking laughter. This time, every seat was taken. There were contractor representatives, attorneys, and tense faces of residents who were beginning to understand that this situation was no longer small. The HOA's attorney spoke first. His tone was calm, but heavy. As of this morning, the total stands at $48,000. My client's proposed payment of $24,000 to resolve the dispute. $24,000. Half. I sat quietly for a few seconds, not because I needed to think, but because I wanted them to feel that silence. Karen sat across from me. She no longer held eye contact. Her gaze shifted between me and the papers in front of her. I understand you want to minimize your losses, I said slowly, but this is not a discount negotiation. This is a legally incurred debt. A board member interrupted, his voice pleading. We were not informed that the fees would become this high. The sign was clear. Notice was sent before you continued parking. The attorney gave a slight nod, acknowledging that fact. The contractor's representative spoke up, exhaustion in his voice. Every day this project is delayed, we lose more money. Buyers are starting to ask questions. If the lien is not released, we cannot complete deliveries. And I looked at him. There was no defensiveness left in his eyes, only the desire to end the crisis. I am not trying to destroy your project, I said. I am protecting my property. Karen suddenly spoke. Could you reduce part of it, as a gesture of goodwill? I turned to her. For the first time, there was no arrogance in her eyes, only fatigue and worry. In that moment, I remembered the first morning, when she said I was not using that land, when she laughed in that meeting room and called me someone who was overreacting. I could have kept the full amount. I could have let it continue to rise. Financial karma does not require compassion. But real power is not about crushing the other side. It is about knowing when to stop. I will reduce a portion, I said. The room shifted slightly. I am willing to waive the final 2 days of fees. The total payment will be $40,000. Upon full payment, I will sign the lien release the same day. Silence. The attorney turned to Karen. They exchanged a look. A board member whispered, "That's reasonable." Karen took a long breath. "We need to confirm, with the reserve fund." "I will wait until 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon," I said. "After that time, the fees will continue to accrue." Short, clear, not a threat, just a fact. That evening, I sat on my porch, looking at the trucks still resting on my land. Construction lights cast long shadows over the ground, still marked with oil stains that had only been superficially treated. At 4:27 the next afternoon, my phone vibrated. "We will pay." Karen's voice was quieter than ever. "Cashier's check?" I asked. "Yes." When she arrived at my house at 5:10 in the afternoon, she carried a thick envelope. No high heels, no polite smile, just a woman signing the consequences of a decision she had underestimated. I counted the amount. $40,000. Complete. I signed the lien release. My signature was steady. Karen looked at me, regret and wounded pride mixed in her eyes. "I thought you were bluffing." "I never bluff," I replied softly. She nodded, as if accepting an expensive lesson. When she left, I stood there looking at the envelope on the table. It was not victory. It was not joy. It was balance restored. Financial karma is not meant to destroy anyone. It exists to remind us that every action carries a price. And this time, they paid. The next morning, the trucks began pulling out before the sun climbed high. No horns, no shouting. Just the low, heavy rumble of engines leaving the land they once thought was theirs. I stood on my porch, a cup of coffee in my hand, steam still rising softly. One by one, the cement mixers turned around, their massive tires rolling over soil that had been pressed deep into ruts. The steel trucks followed behind in a slow line. There was no more casual indifference. No more laughter. Just work that had to be done. When the last truck finally drove away, my lot fell silent again. But this silence was different from before. It was thicker. It carried weight. I stepped down onto the land. The tire tracks were carved into the ground like scars. Dark patches marked the spots where oil had once spread. Grass had been crushed into a brownish-green dust. It no longer looked untouched. I knelt down and placed my hand on the soil. It was still mine, but it had endured a test, just like I had. That afternoon, a crew of workers arrived, not to park, but to repair. Under the supplemental agreement after payment, the contractor was required to level the ground, replace the contaminated soil, and lay down a fresh layer of gravel. The construction company's representative stood beside me as they worked. "We didn't want this to happen," he said. Neither did I. He looked toward the HOA neighborhood, where new houses were being completed day by day. "We trusted the board when they said this land wouldn't be an issue." "I was never the issue," I replied quietly. "I was the boundary." He nodded, thoughtful. Perhaps he was wondering how one small decision had led to a payment of $40,000 and a week of delays. That evening, I received an email from a board member. Not from Karen. "We are reviewing the leadership role. We were not fully informed. We apologize for not listening from the beginning." I read the email twice. Not because I needed the apology, but because I realized something more important. Power built on dismissal is always fragile. A few days later, I saw a notice posted on the HOA bulletin board. A vote to replace the president had been scheduled earlier than expected. Karen no longer appeared at the edge of my property. She no longer stood there pointing. No more tight smiles. One afternoon, I ran into her at the nearby grocery store. She pushed her cart slowly, without the elaborate makeup she used to wear. She looked at me. No avoidance, no challenge. "I resigned," she said plainly. I did not act surprised. "I thought I was protecting the community's interests," she continued. "But I forgot to ask the person who was affected." I looked at her for a few seconds. The sharp confidence was gone from her eyes. What remained was the fatigue of someone who had learned an expensive lesson. "Leadership isn't deciding for others," I said. "It's taking responsibility when you're wrong." She nodded. No excuses, no arguments. We stood there in the middle of the grocery aisle like two ordinary people. No longer opponents. When I returned home, the new gravel had been evenly spread across the section that had sunk. The fence had been reinforced, stronger than before. I also installed a drainage system along the boundary, just in case anything like this ever happened again. I used part of the payment to do it, not to show off, not for revenge, but to reinforce the line. That evening, I sat on the porch as usual. The sky turned shades of orange and purple as the sun set behind the newly built houses. There were no engines, no headlights sweeping across my yard, just a light breeze and the rustle of leaves. They once thought I was powerless. An old man living alone outside the HOA system. No voice, no influence. But real power does not come from titles or numbers. It comes from knowledge, from patience, from standing tall when others expect you to bow. My lot is empty again, and this time, that emptiness is no longer seen as useless. It is a reminder. My land. My terms. 3 weeks after the incident, I found a strange letter placed at my door. Not a bill, not a warning, an invitation. The new HOA board wanted me to attend the next community meeting as a guest of honor. I stood there for a few seconds, the letter in my hand, the evening breeze moving gently along the fence that had just been reinforced stronger than before. The same neighborhood that once saw me as an obstacle now wanted me seated as an honored guest. Life can turn very quickly. That evening, I walked into the familiar meeting room, but the atmosphere had changed. There was no mocking laughter, no probing stares. The new president, a gray-haired man who had once sat silently during previous meetings, stood up as I entered. "Thank you for coming," he said. I took a seat in the front row. Not in the center. I did not need to be. The meeting began with a formal announcement. The board acknowledged that they had mishandled the use of private land. They introduced a new policy requiring all commercial activities to have clear contracts and written consent from any affected property owner. Not because they had suddenly become better, but because they had learned. After the announcement, The new president turned to me. "Would you like to share a few words?" The entire room looked in my direction. The people who had once believed Karen. The ones who thought I was making a big deal out of nothing. I stood up slowly. "I am not here to say that I was right," I began. "I am here to say that ownership is not something to be taken lightly." The room was quiet. I could even hear the faint creak of a wooden chair as someone shifted in their seat. When you parked on my land, perhaps in your minds it was just convenience. But to me, it was a boundary. I paused, looking at each face. I have managed large projects before. I understand deadlines. I understand money. But I also understand that if we ignore a small boundary today, tomorrow it will be a larger one. A man at the back of the room nodded slowly. I did not try to make money from this situation. If I had wanted to, I could have let the fees continue to rise. I chose to stop when it was enough to serve as a reminder. That statement made a few people exchange glances. They did not know that I had waived the final 2 days. They did not know I could have pushed the number higher. Power is not about forcing others down. It is about knowing when to stop. After the meeting, several residents came to shake my hand. An older veteran leaned closer and said quietly, "You did what many of us wanted to do, but did not dare." I looked at him. There was respect in his eyes. I am not a hero. I am simply someone who did not step back. When I left the HOA neighborhood, it was already dark. Soft yellow streetlights lit the clean road. I walked past my land. The new gravel reflected faintly under the moonlight. No trucks, no oil stains, only a clear boundary. They once underestimated me. They thought I was just a lonely old man living outside their HOA system. They did not know that I had built an entire career on understanding laws, contracts, and people. They did not know that my silence was not weakness. It was preparation. I stood there for a long moment, looking at the empty lot. No one using it, no one trespassing. Freedom is not always about doing whatever you want. Sometimes it is about protecting what is yours when it matters. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. If one day someone dismisses your boundary because they think you will not push back, what will you do? Will you let it slide to keep the peace? Or will you stand up, calmly, understand the rules, and make them respect you? Share your story below. I read every comment. And if you believe that principles still matter in this time, support the channel by following and staying with me for the next stories. Because sometimes, the most expensive lesson is not the $40,000. It is understanding that your boundary deserves respect.